terribly excited about painting anything big and dramatic, like jumbos and steam locomotives, and they both need saving. I'm known as the man who loves giants. Sadly, there are people all over the world who slaughter wildlife for money and greed. Take elephants, for example, for their ivory. I believe, and I'm sure you do, that ivory looks best on the dear old jumbo where it belongs.
This was my very first oil painting in 1948. No wonder that the only art school that I'd tried to enter failed me. They said I was so bad that I wasn't worth training. Fortunately, I met Robin Goodwin, and he taught me all I know. Surely it was a case of 3% talent and 97% training. I began my career as an aviation artist, spending my first year as a professional in 1953 at London Airport. It was a friendly place then, and I had a permit to drive my little car all over the runways. And the aeroplanes, they were gorgeous things with bags of character, super Constellations and Stratocruisers, proper aeroplanes with propellers. I was learning the hard way in all weathers, and the noise and the dirt and the perpetual wind that shook the canvas. And they had a habit of towing the aeroplanes away when you were halfway through painting their portraits. The services began to take notice of me and commission me. Lancasters returning from a raid, Dakotas over the Rhine. They were all fascinating subjects demanding extreme accuracy. And to achieve this, it meant flying in-service aircraft over the actual scenes of World War II. Driving tanks, flying in helicopters, it was all fabulous fun.
I owe a very special debt of gratitude to the Royal Air Force, because I flew with them to Africa in 1960 to paint aeroplane pictures for them. When I arrived in Nairobi, they said, we don't want pictures of aeroplanes because we fly them all day. Do you do local things like elephants? To which I said, well, I never have done, but I'll have a try. And that's how it all started.
And so jumbos came into my life. And to begin with, I never imagined what they'd do for me in the future. Painting elephants like this, by the way, is not to be recommended, although it's amazing how close one can get without their becoming aware of you. Elephants have very poor eyesight, but if the wind is in your favor and you're very quiet, it's possible to creep up to within 60 feet, as I am here. I know because we pasted out afterwards. Here, a centuries-old baobab tree has fallen, aided no doubt by the elephants gouging with their tusks into the soft, fibrous tree until it crashes to the ground. It's always a sad event to see. The jumbos love to chew the tree, probably for its calcium content. Jumbos are gentle, benevolent creatures. I always remember being told when I first went to Africa, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. There's always the unexpected, however, as I found out the hard way by being chased, and one should never take liberties. I suppose painting their portraits is a bit of a liberty, but I can never tire of studying elephants when they're undisturbed. To watch them just getting on with the business of being elephants is surely one of the most awe-inspiring sights in all Africa. One feels so totally insignificant, as indeed one is. They're fascinating animals to watch. Big ones, baby ones, dad, mother, uncles and aunties, red ones and grey ones. Sadly, the poor old jumbo has a price on his head. The days of the great tuskers carrying ivory of possibly 180 pounds or more on either side, tusks so huge that the animal would have to lift his head when walking, are over. These great animals are treasures far more valuable, surely, than anything man-made, for they can never be recreated. We shall never see their like again. Wise old elephant, the first jumbo painting to put me on the map. Painting from life, of course, is always the best way of doing it. It's the only way to get the complete feel and the atmosphere of Africa onto the canvas. Here, in the Luangwa Valley in Zambia, my favorite national park, it was mighty hot, and my wife Avril is sensibly sitting in the shade. It's as important, I believe, to get the habitat right as the animal itself. And it was here, whilst painting in Africa, that I came face to face with the horrors of poaching. I've seen sights that have sickened me and filled me with feelings of such utter disgust and uncontrollable anger that I've wept. Feelings of outrage that man can do this to the poor old rhino. That this inoffensive, rather sad and prehistoric animal, who's been with us for 60 million years, can die in conditions of appalling suffering and misery at the hands of the poacher. just because the Chinese believe that his horn, when powdered down, is a sex potion, and just because the Arabs like his horn for the handles of their daggers. It can take several weeks for an elephant or a rhino to die from a poisoned arrow, a lingering, agonizing death. This poor old rhino just made it to the water's edge. Isn't it amazing that man who can create a Beethoven symphony or paint a Mona Lisa can perpetrate such barbarism for money? If the animals aren't killed with poisoned arrows, they suffer a slow torture caught in wire snares, like this poor impala. This surely tells the whole ghastly story. The animal may well have struggled for hours in the heat, with the wire going ever deeper into its throat. All around, the bushes were broken, telling how the terrified animal must have fought for its life. I saw revolting sights like this when I first went to Africa in 1960, and it's no wonder that I became a conservationist. This is Eleanor, quite the most remarkable elephant that I've ever met, and also the friendliest. She's interested in everything, including my sketch pad. Actually, she was looking for bananas. Eleanor and all her wild animal friends belonged, if that's the word, to David and Daphne Shodrick. David was the game warden in charge of the Tsavo National Park in Kenya. There were other animals too. This is Punda, the zebra, who was always getting his nose into everything. Tourists visiting the park would all too often find baby animals. They might be elephant, rhino, zebra, buffalo, wandering helplessly alone or standing pathetically by their dead mothers, who in turn may well have fallen victim to drought or died at the hand of poachers. The sympathetic visitor would bring these orphans to Daphne, and another animal would join their family. David and Daphne were acting simply as guardians with the intention of returning the animals to the wild when they might be old enough to fend for themselves. Jumbos and rhinos, of course, adore mud baths, and how's that for a contented rhino? For me, of course, situations like this afford me with the most marvellous opportunity to study wild animals close to. In fact, so close that the problem was to push the animals away from me. My good friend Simon Trevor, the wildlife filmmaker, made a rather rickety platform in a very dead tree many years ago for one of his wildlife films. Simon suggested that if the platform was still there, we might sit in it to see if any animals might come down to drink. We found the tree okay. It had almost fallen over, and there were only a few planks left of the platform, but we climbed up, and there followed one of the most exciting and rewarding afternoons I've ever spent in Africa. 300 elephants came down to drink. At certain times, they were so close to the platform that if I'd stretched my leg over the edge, I could have touched the tops of their backs. We had, of course, to be desperately quiet all the time because they would have heard every sound, possibly even the whirring of my movie camera. Always rest, if you possibly can, this marvellous elephant standing in a typically characteristic pose, standing on 3 legs and resting his trunk over one of his tusks. The really dicey bit, in fact, was when they came right under the tree, because if a stroppy little bull had taken it into his head to have a scratch against the tree, the whole thing would have gone over. But it was a marvellous opportunity to study elephants just behaving absolutely undisturbed, mucking about. There were baby ones feeding. They were sloshing about in the mud. Baby elephants that size, that one's about 5 weeks old, possibly less. They don't know what to do with themselves. They suddenly get it into their heads to shake their trunks and then get bored and they do something else. They roll about and play in the grass, digging away in the bank for some unaccountable reason. And sloshing is underneath with wet mud. Absolute heaven for an elephant in the heat of the afternoon. Remarkable cow elephant, that one, with a misshapen tusk. Quite a common occurrence in Tsavo. And the result was this painting. It's the biggest elephant canvas I've ever done. There are 178 elephants in this picture, and it's entirely as a result of those fabulous 4 hours sitting in there. For me, the tiger has to be the most beautiful animal in the entire world. And in 1973, tigers were on the brink of extinction. I was out in India to get material for my painting Tiger Fire, which was to be a milestone in my life.
December the 4th, 1973, the Order of the Golden Ark is bestowed upon David Shepard for services to conservation, in particular to Zambia and to Operation Tiger, through his outstanding talent as a painter. Signed by the Prince of the Netherlands, Bernhard.
Thank you.
I'm speechless for once, and anybody who knows me well, that's quite a thing. But Your Royal Highness, Your Excellency, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, I really am overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. I've made a lot of incredibly scruffy notes for a speech, but this has absolutely knocked me sideways. I just no idea that honour was going to be bestowed upon me, and I'll try and say what I was going to say from my notes. But I must say thank you, sir. Beyond belief, I'm so overwhelmed. Of course, it's a marvellous opener to, when you have to make a speech to a distinguished gathering like this, to have something like your leg in plaster. It's quite astonishing. I was not kicked by an elephant, as it appropriately should be, or mauled by a tiger, but I fell off one of my steam locomotives. And it's astonishing to me tonight, everybody in the room apparently knows about my steam locomotives, because every single person who's come up to me says, I bet you fell off one of your engines. And I did.
It was in 1967 that I probably did the maddest thing in my whole life. I rang up British Rail and said, can I buy 2 steam engines? And that was the beginning of the East Somerset Railway.
It was all happening just at the right time for me. My wildlife paintings were getting known and wanted. Steam engines were going to the scrapyards at the rate of hundreds a week. Britain was throwing away her great steam railway heritage in a frenzy of premature dieselization, and almost new locomotives were available for the asking, providing one had the money. For £5,800, I bought 92203 and 75029. British Railways thought I was mad, a not unreasonable conclusion, I suppose. My jumbos also bought us our lovely Surrey farmhouse, built in 1650, all oak beams and wisteria, not to mention a super studio, and 16 acres with a trout lake. But still, I had to find a home for my locos, and I was getting desperate. But this painting of Christ solved the problem. I was commissioned by the army chaplains to paint a 15-foot-long religious painting to hang behind the altar of the Army Garrison Church at Borden in Hampshire. The army had their own railway a few miles away, and one of the officers that I'd come to know through the painting for their church just happened to be a railway enthusiast, and so my locos found a home on the Longmoor Military Railway. Sadly, the scheme to preserve Longmoor failed. A few of the local people bought the line from underneath us, and we had to leave. Lord Fisher, our little tank engine, was the very last steam locomotive to leave the Longmoor Railway, and determined to go out in a blaze of glory, she steamed up onto her low loader and, still in steam, went right down the middle of Godalming High Street through the Saturday morning shopping crowds, and hardly a soul even noticed. April the 7th, 1973. This is a moment of history, the beginnings of the East Somerset Railway, and we didn't start with very much. We had a station that we began to collect bits in Bristol city centre. It cost me every bit of 10 quid. It's a rare model with a slot sentry. The old boy who designed it would be thrilled to bits to know that we'd saved it for eventual re-erection at Cranmore. Months of hard work by volunteers and the transformation of Cranmore Station, vintage 1857, is complete. This is Westbury on the morning of November the 18th, 1973. Our locos had been stored on an expensive British rail siding at Eastleigh for 2 years whilst we searched for a home. Finally, BR allowed the Green Knight and Black Prince to steam proudly from Eastleigh out onto the last leg of their journey up the branch to Cranmore. Black Prince was hauling Stowe and our marvellous old collection of wagons, some of which we bought from the army at Longmoor for the vast cost of £4.10 each. Moreover, they were passed as fit to travel on British railways. This has to be one of my proudest moments, to have my very own Black Prince in steam on British railways, moving up the hill into a new home at last. We've built a locomotive depot at Cranmore, which we honestly believe to be unique, one of which the Victorians themselves may well have been proud, surely a reminder of their great traditions of railway architecture. Moreover, because it's meant borrowing such a huge amount of money from the bank, it's been tailored to fit Black Prince and the Green Knight to the nearest inch. On June the 25th, 1975, we were opened by royalty. His Royal Highness Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, then International President of the World Wildlife Fund, flew over from Holland, spent 5 hours on the East Somerset Railway with Black Prince and the Green Knight, and we gave all the proceeds to help save elephants. What could possibly be more appropriate than that?